The night air over the Italian peninsula carries the smell of smoke and rot. Inside a tent of stretched hides and silk plundered from Constantinople, a woman barely into womanhood lies rigid beside the most feared man alive. His name has been whispered as a curse in every language from the Danube to the Loire. Tonight, on what should be a night of celebration, his wedding feast, Attila the Hun, lies face down in his own blood. It pours from his nose, pooling beneath his beard, soaking into the furs and stolen tapestries that line his bed. The girl, Ildiko, does not scream. She waits until morning. When his guards finally break through the doors, alarmed by the silence, they find their king cold and still. No wound from a blade, no mark of poison they can prove. Just a hemorrhage, perhaps from a lifetime of drink, perhaps from something far more deliberate. The man who brought Rome to its knees, who commanded an empire stretching from the steppes of Central Asia to the forests of Gaul, has died not on a battlefield, but in a bridal bed. And the empire he built, an empire held together by nothing more than the terrifying gravity of one man's will, begins to collapse before his body is even cold. This is the angle the chronicles dare not say plainly. The Scourge of God was not killed by legions or by faith. He was killed by intimacy. The most dangerous man in the 5th century was undone in the one place he could not wear armor. He was born sometime around 406 A.D. into the royal house of the Huns, a nomadic people whose origins traced back to the vast emptiness of the Central Asian steppe. The Romans called them barbarians. The Goths, who themselves terrorized Rome, called the Huns something worse. They said they were born from the union of witches and unclean spirits, creatures barely human. This was fear-talking. The Huns were supremely human, adaptive, cunning, masters of mounted warfare, who could fire arrows at full gallop with a precision that made Roman infantry formations irrelevant. Attila shared power first with his brother Bleda. The two inherited leadership of a loose confederation of Hunnic and Germanic tribes from their uncle Ruga, who had already begun extracting tribute from the Eastern Roman Empire. But shared power was a cage Attila could not abide. By 445, Bleda was dead, killed during a hunting trip under circumstances no chronicler found convincing. With Bleda removed, Attila consolidated authority with a ruthlessness that was strategic rather than mindless. He understood that the Hunnic Empire was not a state in any Roman sense. It had no bureaucracy, no written laws, no permanent capital. It was a web of loyalty, fear, and profit, and at its center sat Attila, holding every thread. His court, described by the Roman diplomat Priscus, who visited in 449, was a study in contradictions. Attila ate from wooden plates while his guests dined on silver. He wore plain linen while his lieutenants draped themselves in gold. This was not humility, this was theater. He was showing every chieftain and vassal king in the room that his power did not depend on ornament. Priscus noted something else, Attila's eyes. They were small, sharp, restless, sweeping the room constantly, reading every face. He rarely laughed. When he did, it was at the antics of a deformed jester, and even then the laughter seemed calculated, a performance of ease meant to unsettle those watching. Here was a man who weaponized even silence. His fatal flaw was not cruelty. Cruelty was simply a tool, applied with the same efficiency as diplomacy. His fatal flaw was belief, belief that the system he built could endure because he endured. He fathered countless sons, married numerous wives, but never created an institution that could outlast his heartbeat. Every alliance, every submission, every tribute payment was negotiated with Attila personally. He was the empire. And empires made of flesh do not survive the grave. In 450, something astonishing arrived at Attila's court. A ring. It came from Honoria, sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III. Honoria had been caught in an affair with her chamberlain and was being forced into a marriage she despised. In desperation or brilliance, she smuggled her signet ring to the most dangerous man in the world, along with a plea for rescue that Attila chose to interpret as a proposal of marriage. He demanded half the Western Empire as her dowry. Rome refused. And so, in 451, Attila gathered the largest army Europe had ever seen: Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, Rugians, Syrians, and crossed the Rhine into Gaul. City after city fell. Metz was razed. Rheims capitulated. The path of destruction curved southward toward Orléans, and for a moment it seemed nothing could stop the tide. But Rome, even in its twilight, still had one move left. The general Aetius, himself a man who had spent his youth as a hostage among the Huns, who knew Attila personally, who had once called him an ally, assembled a coalition as improbable as the threat it faced. Romans fought alongside Visigoths, Alans, Burgundians, and Franks. Former enemies locked shields against the one force that frightened them all. The two armies met at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in June 451. It was carnage beyond reckoning. The ancient sources, prone to exaggeration but not invention, speak of a brook swollen to a torrent with blood. Theodoric, king of the Visigoths, was killed in the fighting, trampled beneath the hooves of his own cavalry, and yet the coalition held. For the first time, Attila was stopped. You are standing in Attila's camp that night. Fires burn on the ridge above the plain. Around you, wounded men groan in languages you cannot name. Attila has ordered a pyre of saddles built at the center of his encampment. If the enemy breaks through, he intends to throw himself onto the flames rather than be captured. This is not despair. This is the calculation of a man who understands that his myth is worth more than his life. A captured Attila is a diminished god. A burned Attila is eternal. But the attack never came. Aetius, in a decision that baffled his allies and has puzzled historians since, allowed Attila to withdraw. Some believe he feared the Visigoths would become too powerful without the Hunnic threat to check them. The old Roman game of balancing barbarians against barbarians was so deeply ingrained that even on the edge of annihilation, the instinct to play politics won. Attila retreated, but he was not finished. The following year he invaded Italy itself. Aquileia was besieged and obliterated so completely that survivors fled into the coastal marshes, where they would eventually found Venice. Milan fell. Pavia fell. Rome lay open. And then, impossibly, Attila stopped. Near the banks of the Mincio River, he met with Pope Leo I. What was said in that meeting, no one recorded with certainty. Legend credits Leo with divine persuasion, painting images of Saints Peter and Paul hovering above the Pope with drawn swords. The truth was likely more mundane. Plague was ravaging Attila's army. Eastern Roman forces were threatening his homeland, and his supply lines were stretched to breaking. But the image endured, the holy man turning back the savage. It became the story Rome needed to tell itself about its own survival. Attila withdrew to his palace beyond the Danube. He was planning another campaign against Constantinople this time, when, in early 453, he took a new bride named Ildiko. The wedding feast was lavish. Attila drank heavily. By morning he was dead. His warriors wept. They slashed their own faces with knives so that the greatest warrior in history would be mourned not with women's tears, but with the blood of men. They buried him in a triple coffin, iron, silver, gold, and diverted a river to hide the grave. The slaves who dug the burial were killed to protect its secret. To this day, no one has found it. Within a year, his sons were at war with each other. Within a generation, the Hunnic Empire had disintegrated entirely. The peoples Attila had subjugated rose in revolt. At the Battle of Nidau in 454, a coalition of Gepids, Ostrogoths, and others shattered Hunnic power forever. The empire that had terrorized half the world vanished as if it had been a fever dream. The irony cuts deep. Attila had been the one force capable of uniting Rome's enemies into a single fist. Without him, those enemies turned on each other, then turned on Rome individually, each picking at the carcass of an empire already too weak to resist. Within 23 years of Attila's death, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. The Scourge of God, it turned out, had not been Rome's destroyer. He had been the last thing holding Rome's destruction in a shape Rome could fight. Once he was